Thomas often grumbled in the yard about not being able to pull trains. "I've pulled the express before," he would say. "Why can't I take passenger trains now?" The other engines laughed. "You're too impatient," they said. "You'd be sure to leave something behind." "Rubbish," said Thomas crossly. "You just wait. I'll show you." One night he and Henry were alone. Henry was ill. The men worked hard, but he didn't get better. Now Henry usually pulled the first train in the morning, and Thomas had to get his coaches ready. "If Henry is ill," he thought, "perhaps I shall pull his train." Thomas ran to find the coaches. Come along, he fussed. "There's plenty of time, there's plenty of time," grumbled the coaches. He took them to the platform and wanted to run round in front at once. But his driver wouldn't let him. "Don't be impatient, Thomas," he said. So Thomas waited and waited. The people got in. The garden station master walked up and down. The porters banged the doors, and still Henry didn't come. Thomas got more and more excited every minute. The fat director came out of his office to see what was the matter, and the garden station master told him about Henry. "Find another engine," he ordered. "There's only Thomas," they said. "We'll have to do it then, Chumish. Be quick now." So Thomas ran round to the front and back down onto the coaches, ready to start. "Don't be impatient," said his driver. "Wait until everything is ready." But Thomas was too excited to listen to a word he said. What happened then, no one knows. Perhaps they forgot to couple Thomas to the train. Perhaps Thomas was too impatient to wait till they were ready. Or perhaps the driver pulled the lever by mistake. Anyhow, Thomas started. People shouted and waved at him, but he didn't stop. "They're waving because I'm such a splendid engine," he thought importantly. "Henry says it's hard to pull trains, but I think it's easy. Hurry, hurry, hurry," he puffed, pretending to be like Gordon. As he passed the first signal box, he saw the men leaning out, waving and shouting. "They're pleased to see me," he thought. "They've never seen me pulling a train before. Oh, it's nice of them to wave." And he whistled, "Peep, peep, thank you," and hurried on. But he came to a signal at danger. "Bother," he thought. "I must stop, and I was going so nicely too. What a nuisance signals are." He blew an angry peep, peep on his whistle. One of the signalmen ran up. "Hello, Thomas," he said. "What are you doing here?" "I'm pulling a train," said Thomas proudly. "Can't you see?" "Where are your coaches then?" Thomas looked back. "Why, bless me, if we haven't left them behind!" "Yes," said the signalman. "You better go back quickly and fetch them." Poor Thomas was so sad he nearly cried. "Cheer up," said his driver. "Let's go back quickly and try again." At the station, all the passengers were talking at once. They were telling the fat director, the station master, and the guard what a bad railway it was. But when Thomas came back and saw how sad he was, they couldn't be cross. So they coupled him to the train, and this time, he really pulled it. But for a long time afterwards, the other engines laughed at Thomas and said, "Look, there's Thomas, who wanted to pull a train, but forgot about the coaches." Thomas used to grumble in the shed at night. "I'm tired of pushing coaches. I want to see the world." The others didn't take much notice, for Thomas was a little engine with a long tongue. But one night, Henry felt sorry for Thomas. He'd seen Thomas's determination with the heavy trains and saw potential in the little engine. "I've got some trucks to take tomorrow," he told him. "If you take them instead, I'll look after the yard." "Thank you," said Thomas. "That will be nice." So, they asked their drivers next morning, and when they said yes, Thomas ran happily to find the trucks. Now trucks are silly and noisy. They talk a lot and don't attend to what they are doing. They don't listen to their engine, and when they stop, they bump into each other, screaming, "Oh, oh, oh, oh! Whatever is happening?" And I'm sorry to say, they play tricks on an engine who is not used to them. Henry knew about trucks. He warned Thomas to be careful, but Thomas was too excited to listen. The shunter fastened the coupling, and when the signal dropped, Thomas was ready. The guard blew his whistle. "Peep, peep," answered Thomas, and started off. But the trucks weren't ready. "Oh, oh, oh, oh!" they screamed as their couplings tightened. "Wait, Thomas, wait!" But Thomas wouldn't wait. Come on," he puffed, and the trucks grumbled slowly out of the siding onto the main line. Thomas was happy. Come along," he puffed. All right, don't fuss, grumbled the trucks. They clattered through stations and rumbled over bridges. Thomas whistled, "Peep, peep," and they rushed through Henry's tunnel. Then they came to the top of the hill, where Gordon had stuck. "Steady now, steady," warned the driver, and he shut off steam and began to put on the brakes. We're stopping, called Thomas. No, answered the trucks, and bumped into each other. Go on! And before his driver could stop them, they had pushed Thomas down the hill and were rattling and laughing behind him. Poor Thomas tried hard to stop them from making him go too fast. Stop pushing! He hissed. But the trucks would not stop. Go on! They giggled in their silly way. He was glad when they got to the bottom. Then he saw in front the place where they had to stop. Oh dear, what shall I do? They rattled through the station, and luckily the line was clear as they swerved into the goods yard. Ooh! Ah! Groaned Thomas as his brakes held fast and he skidded along the rails. I must stop! And he shut his eyes tight. When he opened them, he saw he had stopped just in front of the buffers, and there watching him was the fat director. What are you doing here, chummish? He asked sternly. I've brought Henry's trucks, Thomas answered. Why did you come so fast? I didn't mean to, I was pushed, said Thomas sadly. Haven't you pulled trucks before? No. Then you've a lot to learn about trucks, little chummish. They're silly and must be kept in their place. After pushing them about here for a few weeks, you'll know as much about them as Henry. Then you'll be a really useful engine. Working in the yard was hard for Thomas. It wasn't like the big station. Trains would arrive and leave as quickly as they come. As soon as Thomas had one train ready, another would come in. He often had to help trains up the hill too, and never had much time to have a drink and a rest. One morning, Gordon arrived at the station. The big express was heavier than normal, and he needed help climbing the hill. Come on, little Thomas, he whistled. An important engine like me doesn't have time to wait for tank engines to stop playing in the sidings. Thomas crossly buffered up behind him. As the two started up the hill, Thomas perked up. How do you do it? He asked. Working in the yard is exhausting. I hardly understand how you can be coming and going every day with your trains. Gordon smiled knowingly. It's all about keeping the time, little Thomas. The passengers depend on us to keep the railway running. You have to be careful and not let the hardware get the better of you. At the top of the hill, Thomas went to find a water tower, while Gordon carried on down the line. Goodbye, little Thomas, he called. Look out for me this afternoon. But Thomas had little chance to rest. No time for that, said the station master. These trucks need to go back down the bottom of the hill and be arranged for the next train. Thomas was tired and didn't want to move, but his driver was firm. Come on, Thomas, he said. The fat director is relying on us. Thomas didn't have enough steam to argue, and the trucks made no fuss. So he set off back for the yard. The trucks ran quietly down the hill. Thomas was pleased and put his trust in them. He was too tired to notice them begin to play their tricks on him. "Don't worry about us," they said. "We know where we're to be shunted. We can help you." Of course, we know that the trucks have no sense for timetables and only wanted to have some fun. Thomas, however, knew no different and longed for a rest, so was grateful for the help. "Thank you very much," he whistled, and set to work. Before long, the yards were a mess. No trucks were in their proper place, and Thomas could barely make it from one side of the yard to the other. Now, engines are supposed to whistle to the signalman to set the points. Thomas had to do the same whenever he was crossing the main line with the trucks, but by now, he was so tired that he was hardly paying attention to what he was doing. The trucks were making Thomas's job as difficult as they could, slipping on their brakes and bumping into each other. Eventually, he grew fed up and whistled an angry, "Peep, peep, be quiet!" The signalman misunderstood and quickly pulled the lever in his box. All of a sudden, Thomas found himself swerving out onto the main line. "Stop! Stop!" cried Thomas, but the trucks pushed back, and he soon found himself at a standstill on the main line. "Silly things!" barked Thomas, and whistled an angry "peep peep" at them. But his annoyance soon turned to shock. There came a loud "poop poop" of a whistle, and Thomas looked up from the trucks to find, heading straight towards him, Gordon with the express. "Get out of the way!" cried Gordon. "Back, Thomas! Back!" cried his driver. Thomas's wheels spun, but the heavy trucks held firm. "Ooh!" cried Thomas and shut his eyes. When he opened them, Gordon had stopped just short of him and the trucks. "Silly little engine!" he said crossly. "What are you doing on the main line?" "I was shunting," said Thomas innocently. "The trucks were helping me, but I got switched onto the main line by mistake." "You should know not to listen to the trucks, Thomas. They're what brought you to this yard in the first place. And what if you'd caused an accident? You'd have never been able to clear that up at the rate you're working." Thomas said nothing. He just looked sadly down at his buffers. Eventually, the line was cleared, Gordon carried on with a very late express, and Thomas worked all afternoon to clear the yard. That night, he backed into the sheds exhausted, but he couldn't sleep. He had a lot to think about. Every day, the fat director came to the station to catch his train, and he always said "hello" to Thomas. There were lots of trucks in the yard, and Thomas worked hard to push and pull them into their right places. He didn't trust them anymore. He knew now he wasn't as clever as he had thought. Besides, the fat director had been kind to him, and he wanted to learn all about trucks so as to be a really useful engine. But on a siding by themselves were some trucks that Thomas was told he mustn't touch. There was a small coach, some flat trucks, and two queer things his driver called cranes. "That's the breakdown train," he said. "When there's an accident, the workmen get into the coach, and the engine takes them quickly to help the hurt people and to clear and mend the line. The cranes are for lifting heavy things like engines and coaches and trucks." One day, Thomas was in the yard when he heard an engine whistling, "Help! Help!" and a goods train came rushing through much too fast. The engine, a new one called James, was frightened. His brake blocks were on fire, and smoke and sparks streamed out on each side. "They're pushing me! They're pushing me!" he panted. On, laughed the trucks, and still whistling, "Help! Help!" Poor James disappeared under a bridge. "I'd like to teach those trucks a lesson," said Thomas the tank engine. Presently, a bell rang in the signal box, and a man came running. "James is off the line! The breakdown train! Quickly!" So Thomas was coupled on, the workmen jumped into their coach, and off they went. Thomas worked his hardest. "Hurry! Hurry! Hurry!" he puffed. This time, he wasn't pretending to be like Gordon. He really meant it. Bother those trucks and their tricks, he thought. I hope poor James isn't hurt. They found James and the trucks at a bend in the line. The brake van and the last few trucks were on the rails, but the front ones were piled in a heap. James was in the field, with a cow looking at him. His driver and fireman were feeling him all over to see if he was hurt. Never mind, James, they said. It wasn't your fault. It was those wooden brakes they gave you. We always said they were no good. Thomas pushed the breakdown train alongside. Then he pulled the unhurt trucks out of the way. Oh dear, they groaned. Serves you right, puffed Thomas crossly. When the men put other trucks on the line, he pulled them away too. He was hard at work, puffing backwards and forwards all afternoon. This'll teach you a lesson, he told the trucks. And they answered, yes, it will, in a sad, groany, creaky sort of voice. They left the broken trucks and mended the line. Then, with 2 cranes, they put James back on the rails. He tried to move, but he couldn't, so Thomas helped him back to the shed. The fat director was waiting anxiously for them. Well, chummish, he said kindly, I've heard all about it, and I'm very pleased with you. You're a really useful engine. James shall have some proper brakes and a new coat of paint, and you shall be allowed to pull coaches and trucks along the line like the bigger engines do. Oh, sir, said Thomas happily. Now Thomas is as happy as can be. Whenever he's not working in the yard, he puffs proudly backwards and forwards with his trains. The coaches twitter happily behind him, and he's always careful not to let the trucks try their tricks. He's never lonely, because he always sings with the coaches, and sees other engines at the yard and stations. Henry tells him the news every night at the sheds. Gordon is always tired after taking the express, but he never forgets to say poop poop to little Thomas, and Thomas always whistles peep peep in return.